second part of our discussion on ERDs focuses on the cardinality and modality of relationships. Cardinality involves determining how many entities can be evolved in a single instance of a relationship, whereas modality involves the question whether an entity can exist without a related instance of another entity. On completion of the lecture, you will be able to explain the concept of cardinality, explain the concept modality, and encode the cardinality and modality of relationships in ERD diagrams. As said, cardinality involves the question how many instances of one entity in a relationship are associated with an instance of the other entity. Relationships can be one-to-one. In non-polygamous cultures, a person can have only one spouse. One-to-many. A woman can have multiple children, but each child has only one mother. Or many-to-many, i.e., for example, a professor can teach multiple courses, and a course can be taught by multiple professors. Modality, on the other hand, concerns the question whether an instance of an entity can exist without a related instance of the other entity. For example, every individual must have a mother, but may or may not have a spouse. Cardinality is indicated by the outer symbol of the relationship. That is, the symbol closest to the entity. Cardinality can only take one of two values. It can either be 1, which is indicated by a small vertical bar, or it can be many, which is indicated by a crow's foot. In the example, we see that the salesperson can sell many products and that the product may be sold by many salespersons. To read cardinality information from a given ERD, we need to read the information in both directions. To read from left to right, put a or an in front of the left entity, ignore the symbol, read the relationship, read the symbol near the right entity, and then read the entity. Thus in the example below we read, a salesperson works in one office. Obviously, when we read from right to left, we need to do the opposite. Put a or an in front of the right entity, ignore the symbol, read the relationship, read the symbol near the left entity, and then read the entity. Thus, in the example below, we read, an office is worked in or has one salesperson. There are 3 different types of relationship based on the cardinalities of each end. In a one-to-one relationship, one instance of an entity is related to only one instance of the other entity and vice versa. In a one-to-many or one-to-n relationship, one instance of an entity is related to many instances of the other entity, but any instance of the second entity is related to only one instance of the first entity. In many-to-many relationships, finally, many instances of the first entity are related to many instances of the other entity and vice versa. This slide shows an example of a one-to-one relationship. It encodes the following 2 business rules. An instructor teaches one course and a course is taught by one instructor. Here's an example of a one-to-many relationship. Encodes the following 2 business rules. An instructor teaches many courses, but a course is taught by only one instructor. And finally, here's an example of a many-to-many relationship. It encodes the following 2 business rules. An instructor teaches many courses, and a course is taught by many instructors. Whereas cardinality concerns the question how many instances of each entity are related, modality concerns the question whether an instance of an entity can exist without an instance of the related entity. The modality of a relationship is indicated by the outer symbol on the relationship, i.e. the symbol closest to the diamond. There are again only 2 values, namely mandatory, which is indicated by a small horizontal bar, or optional, which is indicated by a circle. If the modality is mandatory, then there must always be an instance of the related entity, and obviously if the modality is optional, this is not so. You can derive business rules from the cardinality and modality symbols in the ERD. In the example below, reading from left to right, we can derive the business rule that a patient has many patient histories, indicated by the crow's foot close to the patient history, and that a patient must have a patient history, indicated by the horizontal bar to the immediate right of the crow's foot. We can summarize this as a patient has one or more patient histories. Reading from left to right, we can derive the following business rules. A patient history belongs to one patient, indicated by the horizontal bar to patient. A patient history must belong to a patient. In other words, we cannot have a patient history if we do not have an associated patient. Again, we can summarize these two rules as a patient history belongs to exactly one patient. Here's a second example. Reading from left to right, we derive the business rules. A patient has many patient histories. A patient may or may not have a history, indicated by the circle to the right of the crow's foot. This may, for example, happen when the practice has recorded the patient details before they have been seen by a doctor. We can summarize these two rules as a patient has 0 or more patient histories. The business rules that we derive from the symbol on patient are the same. The symbols on patient are the same as in the previous example. Reading from left to right, in this example, we derive the business rules. An employee works on many projects. An employee may or may not work on any project. Reading from left to right, we derive the following two business rules. A project has many employees. A project must have an employee. And we can, of course, summarize this as a project has one or more employees. Reading from left to right, the final example allows us to use the business rules. An employee works on many projects. An employee may or may not work on any project. Reading from left to right, we derive the business rules. A project has many employees, and a project may or may not have any employees.